Hi there my friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Oh, first one of 2024. Hope you're all having a good start to the year. Okay, so I'm working on a piece of Clairefontaine pastel matte paper and I'm using PanPastels to apply the background. I've taped the piece of paper down to a board. I've masked out the area where the deer is going to be. I've just used a piece of Frisket masking film. Popped a little bit of masking tape across the bottom to separate the snowy foreground from the background, just to keep it a little bit clean while I work on the background there. And I'm actually using a makeup sponge to apply the background layers. So for those of you who don't know what PanPastel is, it's a pastel in like a little compact like you'd find makeup in, and they're quite expensive, but you do get a lot of pigment and they seem to go on forever. I've only ever had to replace the white and I've been using them for maybe 6-7 years, probably even longer. So they really do go a long way. So I've just applied some dark purples. I do apply some dark blues later on, but I'm just building up like a foundation coat, so to speak, just getting a lot of pigment on there, and then it will all be blended in and you'll see this in process. There's plenty more videos on my channel where I go through processes like this with the PanPastel, but I just find using PanPastel on large areas just makes the whole process a lot quicker. You can get a nice flat layer, nice even layer I should say, of pastel pigment onto the paper in a short amount of time. And I think we all need that, don't we? When we sit down to work on a bigger project, it's nice just to get some areas just filled in, sorted, out of the way, and then we can concentrate on the parts of the painting where we need to add more detail, and you're saving yourself time, and that extra time can be applied to other areas of the painting. Okay, so this is sped up. I think I sped it up by 400%, so it's sped up sort of that amount of time. So it does take a while, but not a lot of time. I think I've completed the background in around about an hour ish. So that doesn't take into account me stopping to sip my coffee and things like that. So but I'm working with a selected a selected few pans. So I think I used 4 or 5 colours just for the background. There was a dark purple, a dark blue, sort of a deep rose colour, a light lilac and a peachy tone. So there might have been 6 colours I was working with. But you can go backwards and forwards, and because of using a soft sponge, I'm actually pushing the pigments right into the tooth of the paper, and that way you can apply more because you're freeing up the surface tooth of the paper. So the YouTube channel has been going really well and finally monetized. I think I've earned £6 up to now, which is great, but it's all it's early days, isn't it? So your likes and subscribes and things like that are truly appreciated. And if you have any questions in particular, please feel free to pop them in the comments below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I do reply to all comments and I do read them all as well. So it's a sort of rinse and repeat, keep going over the layers I've already built up, just building up the intensity of the pigment. Obviously this paper is light grey in colour and I want to lose that light grey colour. I have tried going on to white pastel matte paper before, but I just don't like the harshness of the white, especially when working with wildlife images. So I do like to use a neutral toned paper, so either the light grey, actually the light blue works really well as well, but it's more of a muted blue, it's a greyish blue, but this is just the light grey. You can get it in all different colours, the Clairefontaine pastel matte paper does what it says. I mean, it is made for the application of pastel, but you can use other mediums on it. You can even use wet mediums on it. It does take gouache, it does take watercolour to some extent. I haven't tried acrylics on it, but it just seems to take everything else. It's really, really useful paper to have in the studio. You can also buy the Clairefontaine pastel matte board, which is a lot thicker but obviously more expensive, but this pastel matte paper is thick enough and it does the job. Okay, so having put down as much background flat layers as I wanted and thought I needed for the nighttime sky, I then set about putting these rays of a setting sun in, coming from the bottom up, and then just blending them out as I go. You don't want it to be too streaky. Okay, keep turning the board around. Those of you that know me a long time probably remember that I had a lot of problems with the rotator cuff muscles in my shoulder, so I do tend to rotate the board a bit just to make it more comfortable for me, because I don't ever want that back again. Now my shoulder seems to be 100% mended. Okay, I've got some gouache, so that's opaque watercolour, quite thick, using a toothbrush, and I'm just going to flick some stars into the background just like that, nice and random. And when I feel I've got enough on, that's the background done. You can always go in and slightly alter the background, but once you start adding a mixed medium like the gouache, then it's best to leave it well alone. So when you feel as though you're coming towards a completed part of the painting and you do want to add another medium such as gouache, you're better to take a little break, get a coffee or a tea, walk away for a while, come back, have another look, just to make sure you're happy with how the background looks or with how any aspect of your painting looks, before you then decide to go in with a mixed medium. So gouache, for example, or even coloured pencil, things like that. Okay, so I've removed the Frisk masking film off the deer. I've sketched in the details on the deer now with a very light grey pastel pencil. It's very early in the morning, I'm filming this, recording this voiceover. And now I'm going to set about putting some base layers in. So the two types of pastel pencil that I'll be using for this particular piece are the Cretacolor pastel pencils and the Faber-Castell Pitt pastel pencils, and I just use those for the majority of this piece. So just building up some lights and some darks, trying to find the form in the animal. Don't want it looking flat. From a distance, I guess the ears can look pretty flat, but when you get up close, there's a lot of movement in the ears, lots of shadows, lots of lights, and I'm resting my hand on a mole stick. What that is, it's just a long pole with a big clump of felt or material on one end, and I hook that over the top of the board, and then I hold the other end of the mole stick in my left hand, so I can then rest my right hand on the stick and not on the artwork. Later on, I put the mole stick to one side and I bring out a piece of glassine paper to rest my hand on. And what that is, I think it used to be known as butcher's paper, and it's a non-transferable paper, meaning it doesn't pick anything up, it doesn't smudge anything, so I can rest that against my artwork, rest my hand on that to work. And you can use both the mole stick and glassine with any artworks, oils, acrylics, watercolours, anything you like, and it just keeps your artwork nice and clean. And it keeps your hands clean as well. And obviously we don't want hand oils, you know, the natural oils from your skin going on your artwork, so it is nice just to keep your hand away from the artwork if possible. So just building up different tones and different hues, and because this is the starting point of the animal itself, I am just playing with a few colours at the minute, so I've not what's the word, not really decided that these are the colours I'm going to use throughout the animal itself. I'm just playing with colours at the moment. If a colour doesn't work, I put it back down and pick up another colour. A lot of especially beginner artists always want to know, well, which colours did I use, which brands. Well, that's understandable, because it is nice to let people know which brands of materials I'm using. But when they start saying which colours, it doesn't really matter as much as the contrast in a piece. So if I pick up a brown and try it and I don't like it, I'll just put it down and pick up another brown. If I'm looking for a reddish brown, I might have 4, 5, 6, 7 reddish browns next to me, and I'll choose the one obviously that I think is going to work the best. But when I do pick that one up and try it, if that doesn't work, I just put it down and pick up another one. It's really that simple. So it would take me a long time if I was to write a list of every colour that I used, and it would be useless really, because some of them might be just used once, just for a very small area, and then not used again, and some of them might be used on the majority of the piece. So it's all about having a play with your materials, and if something's working for you, put it to one side. So when I'm using my pencils, I use them straight out of the tins. I'm fortunate that I do have the full sets that have been sent to me, so so I'd take them out of the tins. If I use them and don't like them, I put them back in the tin. If I use it and I want to carry on using it, I put it to one side in a little tray excuse me, just so that I never lose the colour I'm working with. Because when you start to work with a colour you really want and you really like, then it's just best to keep it to one side. Okay, so I'm just applying some lights now, so just defining some shapes on the face. Didn't want to put these shapes in with the initial sketch because they're light areas, I didn't want any dark lines showing through the pastel. So pastel may look very opaque, but in actual fact they are quite translucent, which is nice for one thing. You can glaze with them, but on the other hand you can sometimes see dark lines showing through. Now I could have done these sketch lines all in white pastel pencil, which would have been great, that it would have shown up, but it could be easily lost. That's why I chose just a light warm grey, just to get the sketch lines in. The photo that I'm working from is one of my own, and in actual fact it's just a fallow deer in a field, and I'm sort of eye level with it on the photograph. So what I did is, because I wanted in this painting to look like we're actually looking up slightly at the deer, I just changed the proportions slightly and just altered the lighting and shadowed areas slightly, just so you get the effect that you're looking up at the deer and that you're not actually on eye level with the deer. So when people say, and it's normally non-artists that say this, you know, why just replicate a photograph? And the photograph is just a reference, it's just to give you ideas, it's, I mean, obviously to give you correct proportions and things like that. But also, I'm no photographer. I take photographs that are good enough for me to work from, but then there's sort of a line drawn there, because my photographs are nothing like a professional photograph would be. You know, if a professional photographer went out and took photographs of a fallow deer, they'd probably be mind-blowingly beautiful. Mine just catch a pose, they catch the colour. Hopefully most of the time they do catch the intricate details in fur and things like that, but that's all I need. The pose is the main thing for me. And the photo I worked from for this was nothing to write home about. It was really just a bog standard fallow deer in a field with other fallow deer, actually in Devon, North Devon. So moving on. So, and also, you know, when you're painting, you might see a photograph that you've taken or someone else has taken, and it can spark inspiration. And when I first was going through these photographs I'd taken, sorry, this photograph was taken in Norfolk, not Devon. I don't know where I got Devon from. Yeah, Norfolk. When I was going through these photographs of the fallow deer, this fallow deer just caught my eye, and I don't know why I imagined it standing in a situation that I've reproduced in this painting. But something inside me just said this would look great with a purple background set in sun and snow. So I did it. You know, there's the only thing that's holding you back is your imagination and obviously time. But this is a dry medium. This is a perfect medium if you're just starting into art, or if you're limited for time, because you can do a little bit with a dry medium. Coloured pencils take a long time, but again, dry medium. Pastels, perfect. Graphite or charcoal, though charcoal can be a bit messy. But a dry medium, if you're limited on time, you can do a bit and then walk away and come back and do a bit more and walk away. Whereas with mediums such as oils or acrylics or watercolours, you've really got to know how long you can spend in your studio or at your art desk, wherever you work, because the worst thing is to start a watercolour wash, for instance, and run out of time, because you have got to see that process through, so to speak, to get the finish that you're after. Whereas a dry medium, I could stop just here and I could leave it for a week if need be, come back and I can just carry on and nothing's spoilt, and you're not waiting for drying times and things like that. And the colours are all at hand. Saying that, if you've got a nice large selection of pencils or soft pastels, I would still suggest you start with a limited palette if you're a beginner. Because say you have a full set of pastel pencils or coloured pencils, it can be daunting if you're a beginner, because you might get the feeling that, okay, I've got 120 colours in this tin. They're all there in front of me, all these beautiful colours. So maybe I should be using them all. But if you use them all in one painting, it will look artificial, I guess, unless that's something you're going for, that's the look you're going for. But if you're going for reality, which I like to think my paintings resemble reality somewhat, then it's a limited palette. And also you can mix colours. As I said, pastel pencils, any pastel products, they're not as opaque as you may think they are. So you can glaze, which means putting down a lighter colour, maybe a cream or just an off-white, and then going over it with another colour. And it won't completely cover up that light colour. If you're very light-handed, it will tint it, and that's what glazing is. Just altering a layer underneath with a different colour or hue on top. So I'm using a blending stump there just to blend down the pigments into the tooth of the paper. As I said when we were doing the background, the more you push on the pigment, the further into the tooth of the paper it goes, and it just frees up the surface tooth of the paper. This paper, the Clairefontaine pastel matte paper, feels like cork. If you touch the surface of it, it feels like cork, and it feels as though it hasn't got a lot of tooth, but it has. It's got plenty of tooth. I've never ran out of tooth with Clairefontaine pastel matte paper, and so much so that it's the only paper that I now use for pastel works. I used to use velour and other different pastel papers by different manufacturers, but I've always come back to this Clairefontaine pastel matte. So it's the one I stick with, and when I'm teaching in person, it's the one I encourage students to purchase too. A little bit on the pricey side again, but if you're going to spend, say you're a beginner and you're going to spend, a month maybe on a painting, that's a lot of time invested into a piece of artwork. So why not just invest a few pounds more into decent quality paper too? And the results are so different. You can use the same techniques on a cheaper piece of pastel paper as you would on this, and you will just see a huge difference. The layering capabilities alone are amazing on this paper, and you won't get that on a cheaper paper because you'll run out of tooth and you won't be able to apply so many layers. Also, I don't know what it is about this paper, but it does give the pastels the ability to retain their colour. It's quite strange. Other pastel papers, some of the colours end up looking muted, even if you put them down on their own without another colour with them. They just seem to dull down a little bit, whereas the pastel onto Clairefontaine pastel matte paper, the colours keep their colour. Yeah, they keep their, and if they're quite luminous colour, they keep their luminosity too. So it's brilliant. Anyway, back to the deer. So just messing around now. So like I said, the pose is just about the same as the reference photograph. Everything else is out of my head. So I now know by looking at the background that I've got this light source coming up from behind the snowbank, and I need to get some lights in to the deer to reflect where that light source was coming from. In the reference photo, the light source was pretty much, it was midday, so it's pretty much overhead, so the back of the deer was lit up more so than on this painting. So I needed to switch my shadows and my lights round to just so the deer actually looks like it's standing where it is on this snowbank. So I put some darks into that neck area, and it's just sort of the wrinkles of the skin as the deer's turning his head round, her head round, just those wrinkles in the skin, just depicting that added movement, I guess, into the painting. The things I had to alter in the drawing of the deer were very slight, and just elongated the legs and pushed the hip, the area where the hip is, just a little bit further up, and tilted the head slightly as well, just so the proportions are correct from viewing at an angle where you're below the deer, that's all. If I repeat myself, I'm sorry, I've only had one coffee this morning. It's probably not enough when I'm doing an early morning voiceover. So just adding some highlights down there. Now I've left a highlight running down the back of the neck at the moment, but if you look at the finished painting, I go in and I cover that up. I take that really dark because I thought that was going to work because I've got a highlight running around the ears, but when I looked at it later on, I didn't like it, so I went in and covered that up. The beauty of art. Nothing you do can't be fixed. It's don't be frightened of having a go at something, because we're all learning. I'm 58 this year, and I've been painting and drawing things since I was 4 apparently, and it's just a never-ending learning curve. It's a journey. We're all on it. If you're a creator, you know, if you've only done one painting, you're a creator, you're an artist, you've started your journey. And just know that we're all on the same journey. We might be at different stages along the journey, but we're all on the same journey, and it's a constant learning curve. And people are frightened, you know, beginners are sometimes frightened of making a mistake, but that's part of learning, you know. If a toddler never fell over, they'd never learn to walk, would they? So it's just a learning curve. And the more mistakes you make now, the less mistakes you'll make in the future. And also, if in the future you're doing a painting and maybe you're 3/4 of the way through and it's going so well, you're so pleased with it, and then you make a mistake, if you haven't made that mistake in the past, or a mistake that is similar to that, you won't know how to fix it. So make your mistakes now. Just think of it as part of your learning curve. Teach yourself how to amend that mistake and move on. It's as simple as that. In actual fact, it is the word mistake. Maybe it's, don't think of it as the word mistake. Just think, oh, wish I hadn't have done that. Right, let's rectify it. And once you've rectified it, move on. And if you want to keep a little notepad with problematic things that you've solved, you know, that's fine. And then you can look back at that if it happens again in the future, which no doubt, talking from experience, they do, you know, even though you've made a mistake in the past and you hope you've learned from it, sometimes these things can just reoccur. Maybe you're thinking about your shopping list and you do something wrong in your painting, but these things happen. We're all human, you know, life's a blessing, and, you know, live life. It's not a spectator's sport. We're only here once, so enjoy yourself. And get creating, get the paints out and the pencils out, and encourage other people to have a go too. Right, okay, so I've moved away from the neck area now. I won't say I get bored, because I don't really get bored, but my mind gets a little bit fidgety and I want to work somewhere else on a piece. And it's quite difficult, because when I'm filming for YouTube, it's different if I'm teaching in person, because I will be quite, you know, step 1 you do this, step 2 you do this, step 3 you do this. But when I'm working in the studio like this and I've just got the video camera running, I do want to flit about, especially as a painting starts coming together, because I want to keep a balance running throughout the painting. And so I might be wanting to darken a certain area, and then I'll go to another area of the painting and darken that too, just to keep a balance, adding lights in one area, but then I'll want to add lights in another part of the painting to keep that balance going, just so the painting ends up building up as one and not as little separate pieces. So I worked on the head, as you saw, and down to the neck, and then I just wanted to work on the back end of the deer then. So it means I've not got a pause button on my video camera, so it meant stopping the video camera, repositioning it, zooming back in, switching it on. It does. Oh, am I moaning about something tiny? But when I just want to flit about on a painting, I've got to think, right, I need to adjust the camera as well. Yeah, I'm not really moaning, I'm just sort of stating a fact, that's all. But I do, what I was getting at is I do flit around on a painting. So if you suddenly see the camera angle change, that's probably what I'm doing. I'm just working on another area, even if it's just slightly to one side of where I'm working at the moment. So little tiny details. So on the leg, wanted to get those darks in first. And throughout painting, I'm always wanting to work from the back of a painting to the front of a painting. So if it was something simple like a sky, a tree, and then a grass in the front area, I'd do the sky, the tree, and then the grass. So with this, I'm working the background first, so got that in first, and then I'll do the subject. Now the reason I do it that way round is because I want the subject to be sitting on top of the background. If I do it the other way round, so if I was to get this plain piece of paper, sketch the deer on, and then go in and do the deer, doing the background is possible afterwards, but it's more tricky, because as I bring the colours up towards the deer, I've got to be so careful that the background doesn't overlap the deer. So being careful, and I've seen it, especially in beginner artists, they'll do a subject, so they'll draw a tiger, for instance, or paint a tiger. They'll want to put a background in as an afterthought, and then because they're being so careful not to let the background overlap the subject ends up with like a halo effect around it. This is something that I really advise people to avoid if possible. So this is why I do the background first, preferably with my subject masked out. Then I can be as messy as I want in the background, knowing that the subject area is going to be nice and clean when I remove the mask. You don't have to, use a mask in. I could put the background in first on this piece without a mask, but again, I'd have to be so careful. The background would have been applied a lot slower, because I'd be coming up towards the deer's legs and things like that, and little tiny areas where I'd have to be very careful. It can be done, but just for ease of practice, I guess, and saving time, I do like to mask out areas. Working on this paper, I've found that the best way to mask out an area is just with a piece of Frisket, and it's a sticky back paper, really. It is acid free. It is made for artists, photographers and things like that, and it peels off and doesn't leave a residue. If you're working in watercolour, then you can use either this frisket as well, but you've got to be careful with some papers. If your paper's very rough, then the paint can seep under the edges of the frisket tape or frisket film. You can use masking fluid. I've not tried masking fluid on this paper. I don't see the need, but maybe you could. You'd have to try it on a little tiny scrap piece of paper. But masking fluid can definitely be used on watercolour paper, and just, you know, trial it. If it's a new piece of paper, you know, by a brand you've never heard of, do try a little bit of masking fluid on it first before going on to a whole sheet of paper where you're going to be working your project. And if you want to learn more about watercolours and using friskets and masking fluids and things like that, there's plenty of videos on my YouTube channel to take a look at. Okay, back to this project. I'm off on a tangent, so back to this project. So I've applied the darks, put some detailing on. When you're working with hairs or fur or even feathers or scales, always watch the direction. Look at your reference image. If your reference image doesn't show you something that you need, don't put it in. If you do really need to put it in and it isn't on your reference image, look at other reference images just to get that in your head. Which way does the fur go, or which way do the feathers go on that part of the anatomy of the chosen subject? Sounds simple, doesn't it? But so many beginners will just go in and put fur wherever, and just because the fur direction and texture looks good in one area doesn't mean that that's going to look correct all over the subject. So when you, let's for instance look at fur. When we're creating fur on a subject, look for the direction of the fur, obviously, but the fur length as well, because it changes throughout the body of your subject. It will change. It'll be long in some areas and it'll be a lot shorter in other areas, so just keep that in mind too. Okay, working up onto the rump. So I know the light's coming in from the sort of midsection on the right, so this needs to go a bit darker. I did get all this area in, and I did go back later and glaze over it and make it quite a bit darker. So, but I start off going in with some mid-tones and then going in with some darks just to get those markings in. Now that's nice about working, especially if you've got a limited palette, which I do suggest beginners work with to begin with, is work with a toned paper, so you get that mid-tone already there for you. Then you can go lighter and you can go darker. If you work with a white paper, a problem that you can come across is you can't get any whiter than white. And if you work with black paper, you can't get any darker than black. So if you work with a mid-tone, you can go lighter and darker, and that just helps. It's like when you're mixing paints on a palette. A lot of artists use white palettes, but if I'm mixing oils or acrylics, I like to use a grey palette because the mid-tone's already there and I can see how my colours are mixing lighter and darker. And I think the same applies, in my head anyway, when working on a mid-tone paper. This is light grey paper. It's a neutral colour, which is great as well. And it just gives me that mid-tone, probably a little bit of a lighter mid-tone, but it still works as a mid-tone. So building up the darker areas there. And as I said at the beginning, I'm working with the Faber-Castell Pit Pastel pencils and Cretacolor, however you pronounce it, pastel pencils. They've both got very similar softness. So there's a wide range of pastel pencils out there. The softest probably I've ever worked with are Caran d'Ache, and the hardest ones are probably the Faber-Castell Pit Pastel pencils, and then everything lays somewhere in between those two brands. And it's what you get used to. If I'm working on a bigger project where the the subject is a lot bigger, I'll go for the softer pastel pencils such as the Caran d'Ache or the Derwent. If I'm going, the smaller I go, then the harder I want that pastel lead to be, because I don't want it to keep breaking, and I want to be able to keep a sharp point on it too. I don't know if you saw there, I just wiped the pastel pencil off onto a piece of tissue. When you take a light colour over a darker colour, inevitably the pastel pigment will pick up some of the darker colour, so you just need to keep that wiped off in between each application, just so it doesn't transfer the darker colours to somewhere where you don't want them to be. And going back in with the blender stump. The blender stumps you can get for just a few pounds, £3 or £4 for a pack of maybe 5, and they're ideal just for blending. You can blend pastel, obviously. You can blend charcoal or graphite. Don't sharpen them though. I have seen people attempt to sharpen them, and they just end up going all, the tips of them go all fuzzy. So keep a set. If you're going to work with pastels and you're going to work with charcoal and you're going to work with graphite, just keep a separate little set of the blender stumps separate for each medium that you work with. And if one gets dirty, just wipe it off on an old t-shirt or a lint-free rag, and it wipes off most of the pigment, or a scrap piece of paper you can wipe it off on. And you could keep some ends just for the dark shades and some ends just for the light shades. But don't sharpen them. That's not what they're made for. So this piece is quite self-explanatory, isn't it? Just showing where the colours are going and just building up the layers, building up the textures. So what's everybody working on at the moment? New projects, anybody? Or new mediums maybe? Did you have new mediums for Christmas? I've got a few products that I need to review, so hopefully they'll be doing those soon. I know a lot of you have been asking for a studio tour, so I will be working on that soon, but I'm quite busy at the minute, so it's fitting it all in. But some more suggestions from people for videos, so they've gone onto my to-do list. One lady's requested how I go about airbrushing backgrounds when I'm working with acrylics, so I will be doing that, because that should be quite a quick little video to produce. It's the editing, oh my word, video editing. God, anybody out there want to do my video editing? Never claimed to be tech savvy, but it's just the time factor. Anyway, I feel blessed to be able to do this, so thank you all for watching, and thank you all for subscribing and liking and commenting. It's really, really appreciated, and I do enjoy it. It's lovely just to be able to share with people. Okay, so adding a little bit of lilac. So if I go down with white, if I just went on with a white pencil just here, it would look very flat. And white is very reflective colour, so it's going to be picking up the colours surrounding it. So whenever I'm working a subject with surroundings such as this, I like to pull some of the colours from the background into the subject. So if there's purple in the background like this, there's going to be purple in the subject. If I was to paint a tiger in a green rainforesty area, for instance, I would pull some of the greens into the big cat coat. Sorry, I meant to say jaguar and I said tiger, but there you go. So yeah, I pull colours from the background and the foreground into the subject itself, and that's the way of making it look like it should be there, and it makes it stop looking like it's been cut and paste, I guess, by integrating colours throughout a painting, not just in one area. Which brings me back to another idea. If you go in with the wrong colour, what do you do? So if, for instance, I was, I don't know, listening to some music and I picked up a bright orange and plopped it into my painting, what do I do? If I can't remove that colour or successfully cover it up, then I'm going to apply that colour elsewhere in my painting, but on purpose. And the reason being, if I splodge that bright orange in one area and leave it there and carry on with the rest of the painting, it will be noticeable and it will look like a mistake. It will look like what it was. It was a mistake. But if I put that colour elsewhere in a painting and balance the painting out with that colour, it looks like it's been put there on purpose. So that's another thing, it's something we learn as we work through many paintings. These things happen, and it's just finding a way of rectifying it, finding an answer to that problem, and that's one of them. So don't be worried if you put the wrong colour in. Either cover it up if you can't remove it. If you can't do either of those, then put it somewhere else to balance the painting out, and you'll find it works really well and nobody will notice it in the end. Excuse me, have a sip of water. So building up some depth now. Now the same as I was saying with white, you don't just want to put white down where you think you need white. You always want other colours underneath it, sort of light blues, light pinks. The same goes with black. If I was to go on an area, the tail looks black, doesn't it? But if I was just to go on with black, it would look really flat. But by applying colours underneath it, I can vary how the black looks. So if I want a black area on an animal to look cool, if I want a cold looking subject, then I'll put blues, lilacs, purples underneath. If I want a black area to look warm, if I want a subject to look warm, then underneath the black I'll start off with reddish browns, yellow ochres, things like that, and it just alters the way black looks. And obviously the same goes for white. If I want the white to look really cold, I want blues and lilacs underneath it. If I want the white to look warm, then I'll put light yellows, peachy colours, things like that underneath it. And obviously just because you've put white on doesn't mean you have to stop there. Obviously if you want to go, if something needs to look white, then you can't get whiter than white. But if you've put white on and it looks too stark, then you can glaze over with another colour, as long as you're using a paper with enough tooth to allow that extra pigment to go on. So just going very carefully round the markings, because I don't want to lose them completely. I could add them on top, but because I've quickly popped them in with a lighter colour pastel, I don't want to lose them now, else that's doubling my work. So yeah, so just playing with some different colours there. Do go over this area a few times, because I go in, I get all the colours in and the amount of detailing I want in there. I stand back with a fresh cup of coffee, have a look. No, it's not how I wanted it. So I do go in a few times. And each time I blend the pastel into the paper with the blending stump, and not start again, but just redefine the colours and redefine the textures. So just a little bit of pressure there, just pushing the pastel, or very light pressure there. But when I go up onto the reddish area there, quite a bit of pressure there, just to push the pigment into the paper, into the tooth of the paper. Little bits of detailing going in, fiddling details, slight camera alteration there. Very gentle hand. So at the moment I'm not pushing at all, I'm just letting the tooth of the paper pick up the pigment from the pencil. Going gently round the areas. This video is running at about 1 hour 10 minutes ish. I know a lot of you have been asking for the longer videos, so this is one of them. I'll try and mix it up. I'll try and mix it up with some longer videos and shorter ones. But if you know, let me know what you want. If you want longer videos like this, let me know. And if you want short sped up ones, I can do that too. So I don't set myself New Year's resolutions, but set myself a couple of goals this year, and one of them's working out really well, and the other one's had to take a sideline already. So one of them is Fine Art America. So I've had a Fine Art America account for a few years, and I've never had the time really to get to use it. And I've finally uploaded 21 paintings so far onto Fine Art America, and obviously their UK branch is called Pexels, or Pixels, and I'm now able to sell prints and merchandise through there. So hopefully by the end of the year, doing what I did was right, start again. So, printed out two little charts of things I wanted to do this year, and one of them was to put a new painting onto Fine Art America every week during 2024. Well, I've already put 21 paintings on there, so I'm well ahead of myself there. So hopefully by the end of the year there'll be 52 artworks available as prints and t-shirts and phone cases and things like that. I'll put a link in the description below. The other goal was to release one video a week on YouTube. Yep, that's not happened so far. This is the first one for 2024. So hopefully, I'm hoping that by the end of the year there will be that amount more videos on my channel, and hopefully even more. But I'll need to be catching up with myself. So I have got 2 videos filmed, but because of the company that I was working for at the time, I can't release them yet because the product hasn't been released yet. So so there would have been the right amount of videos so far this year, but I can't release them yet. So hence there might be more than one being released per week later on in the year. So yeah. Building up some darks, textures. There's only so much I can say about this process because it is rinse and repeat. It's exactly the same. Pop your lights in so you don't lose them. Pop your darks in, and then start applying the midtones and values in. Then out comes the blender stump, and you blend them all together and then apply the detail on top. If there's any subjects that you'd like to see me work on, one lady has asked for a giraffe, so that is something that I'm going to be doing soon. She didn't say what medium, so I'll have to think about that. So, and obviously one lady asked for airbrush backgrounds, so that'll be acrylics. I mean, it could be watercolours, but it'll probably be acrylics. So if you've got any mediums that you'd like to see me work with, or any subjects that you'd like to see me cover, or both, you know, if you'd like a certain subject in a certain medium, just let me know. And there you go with the blending stump, and it is slightly blending the colours together, but it's more about pushing that pigment into the tooth of the paper so it frees up the surface tooth for me to apply detail. I went on and applied the detail, I'm assuming the same as the other leg, so it would be like for like. And this is where I start fiddling with the getting that rump high enough, that hip. Remember, there's a skeleton underneath all of that, so I had to push that hip a little bit higher because of the viewing angle of the deer. Just so I don't lose those lights, just add in a little bit more. And a little bit of texture. I'm pleased with how the background looks. I think it's pretty, isn't it? I do like that. Just breaking up the surface there with a little bit of texture. And really, it's quite different, isn't it? The texture around the top of the back legs and tail, where the hair is quite defined. Thinking that the hair is a lot shorter on this rump area, and we'd only be seeing the tips of the fur because of the direction that we're looking at the deer, and you know, the angle that the deer is standing at. And it's just trying to replicate that feel of fur. You don't have to put every hair in. It would be, well, it wouldn't be impossible, but it'd be mind-blowingly hard to do this small with something this small. But it could be done, but it's not needed. And I think when you think about how far away you are when you view your painting, if you stand back and have a good look at it, 9 times out of 10 people stand at roughly 2 1/4 the diagonal when they're viewing a painting. If you stand back 2 1/2 times the diagonal size of your painting, if you're adding details that can't be seen from that sort of distance, then is there any point in adding them? You're making a lot more work for yourself that's not actually ever seen. Now, I don't know if you noticed then, but when I went on the base coat layer underneath what I'm doing now, I did put it on in the direction that I'm now working on top. And the reason being, when you're putting your base coat layers on, do try to go in the direction that you want the top layers to go. Because if you go on with your base coat layers and leave any hard lines, for instance, it's not too bad if they're going in the correct direction, because you can somewhat cover them up with the detailed layers that go on top. So that's something I should have mentioned earlier, and it's just crossed my mind now. Now, blending out some areas with my finger there, and that's just to soften certain areas to make it look like the light's hitting that area in particular. Using some purples and a purpley grey there. Obviously, I said I'm going to be starting introducing some purples into the subject itself. Purples that correspond with the purples that are used in the background. So when I say, if I was going to do, say, a jaguar in a forest, and I want to introduce greens into the jaguar's coat, because there's greens in the background, I would be using the greens that I have already used. I wouldn't go and use a completely different set of greens. And same here, the purples. Obviously, I'm not using the PanPastel purples in the deer's coat, but I am using a corresponding purple out of the pencil collection. So as near as. And when I go over with my finger like that, I'm not blending the pastel down, I'm just softening it slightly. Just softening the look of it. And in with the blender stump. And as you can see, I've used that blender stump on yellow before, but it's not affecting the subject I'm working on now. It's just that the tip of the pencil stump has stained. None of that pigment is being released onto this project because it's been wiped off on a tissue. So yeah, you just use them as they are. Excuse me. Little bit of shaded area there and a camera move. Okay, so as we were saying about using the surrounding colours in our subject, Just building up some darker areas now, some shading areas using lilacs. And that one is very lilac-y grey. I've tried to edit the video so the colours are true. That's something I've taught myself over the past couple of weeks. A little bit more video editing, colour correction and things. Because obviously I want you to see the colours as they are true to me. That's why it's nice to have the actual finished piece on screen so you can see where I'm aiming for. And when I film, I'm just filming under studio lighting. It's very bright lighting, but it is daylight lighting, but for studios. And it does wash out the video a little bit, and I just have to do a little bit of colour correcting and things like that. And I'm quite chuffed with myself that I've actually taught myself a little bit more video editing already this year. May have to work on the voiceovers though, eh? Okay, a little bit more darkening areas, a little bit of glazing as well, going over the lighter areas too. And just softening. I've gone a little bit too dark to begin with there, so I've softened that as well. And that pencil is sort of a pinky colour. It's very, very pale, but it isn't white. It's a sort of a pinky tone. And obviously pinks work really nice with purples. So onto the coat of the animal. The flank, is it? Just there? The side anyway, side of the animal. And working down into that darker area that I'd already put there. Little tiny dots, a little bit of stippling going on there, just to give a feeling of texture. In with the purple again. I should have music playing, shouldn't I? So when I pause, and I've not got a lot to say, at least you can listen to something. And working dark to light and light to dark. You can work both ways with pastel. That's one of the joys of pastel. You can just bend the product, bend the medium to how you want to work or how you prefer to work. And being able to work light to dark and dark to light does help if you do go into an area that you're not too happy with. It's a lot easier to be able to alter an area if you can work both ways. A little bit of glaze in there. I held the pencil on its side so there was very little pressure and just glazed an area, just softened that area down to alter the colour and to alter the values. The value of something is just how light or dark something is. Stippling means just dabbing your pencil up and down, just stippling, just to create texture. So it's not a physical texture, nothing's standing up on the paper or anything like that. It's just a visual texture. And blending it down slightly with the blending stump. So if I put something on and I don't like it, before I try to cover it up or go over it, I just blend it down, push it down into the tooth of the paper. And obviously, as I said earlier in the video, you've got to be working with a paper that has a decent amount of tooth to be able to do that. If you're working with a paper that has just a very shallow tooth, then that pigment is just going to lay about on the surface of the paper, and when you try to work over it, it'll just sort of reactivate it because it will always be there. Stippling again. And even though these are dots and dashes, when the lines are a little bit larger, they do need to be going in the correct direction. So working down this leg now, you can see the the hind legs are all done. If I did want to go in and alter them, that's fine. But for now, I feel as though I've done enough on them to move on. And I'd obviously done enough on the body to move on as well. Getting the darks in first. You can get the lights in first, or you can get the darks in first, whichever you feel easier. Once you've the lights in and the darks in, and you've got the part of the subject is taking the correct form, then you can move on to blending the areas together where they need to blend, and then putting the details on top. Obviously, if you put all your lights in and then all your darks in, and then you blend and blend and blend and blend, you'll just lose the lights and the darks, because everything will end up blending together. I see a lot of people do that in acrylics and oils, that they get a light next to a dark and they blend to get the mid-tone, but they carry on blending and then they lose the contrast and it all becomes one mid-tone. So you do want to avoid over blending, but you do want to blend so that there is a mid-tone between the lights and the darks, even if it's just a tiny blend. It just helps if it's there. So pushing that pigment into the paper, nice and dark. And when I'm blending, I am going in the direction that I want the detail to go, the detail that goes on top. This is a nice vibrant pink, so this pink is sort of in keeping with the area of the background that's adjacent to the leg of the deer. And just building up the detail, watching my reference image quite closely here, just I want to make sure that the hairs do actually go that way on a deer's leg. They did on this deer's leg. Now I'm building up the lights. So the legs were worked exactly, the front legs I should say, were worked exactly the same as the hind legs. And the reason I stopped there is it was just a rinse and repeat. So it's going to be a long video already, and it would have ran on and for around 2 hours if I'd have filmed both the front legs as well as both the back legs. So sorry there, going behind the reference image, but I think you'd rather have the reference image there and be able to see the rest of the foreground going in. So I'm not using the makeup applicator this time. I'm using actually one of the soft sponges, and there's the selection of colours, well, some of them that I'm working with. There are a couple more in that palette that haven't been used, but using the colours that I used in the sky plus white. So I'm now using white as well. So you might think, oh, snow will just pop on some white, but believe me, if you just put white on, it looks so flat and it doesn't look like snow. This is just I wouldn't say the foreground looks realistic, but you're in your head, you know, your brain decides, yep, that's snow. That's just the deer is standing on snow. So I want to just introduce some of the colours that are in the sky and white, and that's all I'm doing. And I'm just making this up out of my head, having a play, experimenting. If it goes wrong, you can lift a certain amount off with a piece of masking tape. If there's something that you've gone on really thickly and you don't want it there anymore, use masking tape. Or you can get your hoover out and a soft bristle brush, and preferably wear a mask if you're going to do this, and you can brush the pastel out of the paper into the hoover nozzle. Done that before. But yeah, it's not recommended, especially if you've got if you're in an enclosed area, or you've got things like asthma and things like that. Wouldn't recommend doing that because the pastel particles can go into the air. But yes, just play and have fun. I was really enjoying this, and I just wanted to get a nice flowing feeling to the snowbank with the colours that I'd already used. Yeah. So I just went for it. So it's just a case of I just went popped some colours in where I felt I needed them, some shadow colours in, some highlights in, and yeah, it's really self-explanatory for this foreground. There wasn't a plan as such. I just knew I wanted it moving in this direction, and that was it really. Now if I'd have had it moving it, yeah, that's the point. If you look at the bottom of if you look at the snowbank in the finished painting, if I was to switch that round so that the snow was going from the top left to the bottom right, I think it would be too similar to the background direction. So I wanted it to be the same direction as the deer. So moving, you know, you got the back of the deer, the rump of the deer to the left and the head to the right, and I wanted the snow to go in that direction as well, from left to right. That was the only planning I had for the foreground, is that I wanted it going in that direction and not the same direction as the background. Does that make sense? I hope so. So the soft tool that you can see me using here it's spelled SOFFT, Soft Tools, and I believe they're made by the same company, PanPastel. They do tools that look like palette knives as well, with little foam socks on the ends that are removable, and you can see me using those in other pastel videos, especially the one of the polar bear. You can see me working a big background in with these soft pan tools, but I will link everything in the description below. This foreground took less time than the background. I think this foreground took about half an hour, that's all. Half an hour, 40 minutes at the most, just to get a foreground in, sorry. Really enjoyable, very relaxing. I don't know if I had some music playing now or a podcast or something on. I think it might have been a podcast, I can't remember. But just relaxed, just taking my time, not rushing. Obviously when you get to this part of a painting, you do want it to be finished, because I'm constantly thinking about the painting that I'm going to be working on next. But that doesn't mean to say that I should rush anything. So I'm still taking my time and feeling relaxed and in the zone. And if I'm not, then I need to stop. Because the worst thing now would be to do something that I regret on a painting that is nearly finished. Obviously, as I was saying, you can rectify things, but it's so much easier not to make those misjudgments and have to rectify them. You know, just keep a steady hand and a sane mind and be relaxed and just work through every part of a painting as though, you know, it's the main area really. Because it saddens me when I see people do drawings and paintings and you can really see which part of the painting they enjoyed and which part of the painting they didn't enjoy. Because every part of a painting has its own story, and every part of a painting is there for a reason. You know, it's part of telling that story. This snow, the drifting snow and the colours in the snow, textures in the snow, they're all as important as the deer. Even though there wasn't as much thought process, I didn't have to do as much planning as I did with the deer, obviously because I changed so much of the deer from the reference image. But it's still as important as the deer. I hope that makes sense. So we're coming towards the completion of this piece anyway. If you're still here with me, thank you so much for staying with me for just over an hour, about an hour and 9 minutes so far. There's only a few more minutes left and then you'll be able to see me finish the piece. Working this foreground, I did work, as you hope you've noticed, light to dark and dark to light. Just flicking up areas of that white. I don't know why that went out of focus then. Flicking areas of the white up into the more shaded areas. just softening some areas, adding little highlights. I think my lighting's altered, hasn't it? That's probably why it went out of focus a little bit, but just building up that texture so none of it looks flat. Just with the movement, I wanted to keep some movement in the foreground, and the movement draws your eye up from the bottom left. If you're looking at the finished painting, you know, your eye can be drawn up from the bottom left up to the ridge of the snow and then up to the deer's face, and then your eyes have got somewhere to rest. In a painting, it is nice if you think of a composition, where will my eyes rest when I'm looking at painting? So something needs to draw your eyes into a painting. And there you have him. Thank you so much for staying with me this past hour and 10 minutes. Feels like a year probably if you're listening. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, stay safe and stay creative. Bye for now. Bye bye.